Breaking news at noon, St. Louis Sheriff Alfred Montgomery is going to jail. Our Mark Maxwell just walked out of the courtroom. Mark, will he remain in house arrest until his trial?
Yeah, Paul, good afternoon. You're right. We're just outside the federal courthouse here, and that's where the surprising developments just unraveled moments ago. Federal marshals are taking Sheriff Montgomery into custody as we speak. That was the shocking turn of events his lawyers did not see coming. They were here on a bond revocation hearing. You'll recall it was late last week, that federal prosecutors unsealed new indictments, new federal criminal charges against the sheriff, alleging that he had retaliated or tampered with witnesses in the federal misdemeanor case. We now know that prosecutors have found evidence and they had a pretrial services officer. That's the person at the court who basically looks over your bond, goes through to make sure that you're not violating the terms of your release. And that person was called to testify under oath. That was a significant turning point in this case because that pretrial services officer painted Sheriff Alfred Montgomery as combative. The judge said cagey, getting into spats over whether or not he tested positive for marijuana, for example, or giving different and inconsistent numbers of how many handguns, rifles, and assault rifles he had in his possession that he had to hand over while he's under this criminal case. But we now know there was a third piece here, an alleged burner phone. After the judge told Sheriff Montgomery, you're being charged with a federal misdemeanor, you cannot have any contact with witnesses or victims in this case. After he received those clear instructions in this federal courthouse, Montgomery went out and, according to prosecutors, obtained a burner phone, then used that phone to make those comments that we reported just last week, the comments where he mentioned wanting to take negative action, adversarial employment action against some of the different witnesses he thought were, quote, snakes in his office. Then the pretrial services office said that he wanted to, quote, punch someone and knock them out in this phone call. That's a recording that prosecutors played for this pretrial services officer in court. At the end, the judge looked for ways to create alternatives to sending the sheriff to jail. Maybe there could be some kind of a committee at the sheriff's office that would make employment decisions, and they would basically disempower the sheriff from taking any kind of retaliatory action. But in the end, the judge didn't trust the independence of that committee or didn't think that the existence of that committee would alone stop the sheriff from still taking other circuitous routes around that committee to express himself or to violate the terms of his release. So again, the stunning moments just now, Sheriff Alfred Montgomery heading for federal custody. And one other stunning confession here, Paul. We know that Sheriff Montgomery's own lawyers confessed in court that if he is sent to jail, it's hard, if not impossible, for him to continue in his role as sheriff. What that likely means is that we could see the Attorney General in state court, a separate case, file a new motion asking that judge for a fifth consecutive time to expel this sheriff from office. That would be a permanent action. This trial still now ongoing, and he's still presumed innocent until he's proven guilty. His lawyers are now leaving the court, Paul, so we could perhaps get some sound and reaction from these lawyers. Would you like us to do?
If you're black and in position of authority, or trying to help the community, or running a nonprofit, or have any type of power as an elected official in the St. Louis metropolitan area, you better be on your P's and Q's. You better keep your nose clean and do everything by the book, because law enforcement, the FBI, the feds will come from you. This is Mr. 100K a day, y'all. Thank you for another video with 100K Paralegal Services. Today we're talking about Alfred Montgomery, the new sheriff, the 28-year-old sheriff who was just elected in the last year or so, now in federal custody because of him violating his bond. Now, all of this traces back to the incident with him detaining jail commissioner Tammy Ross in an issue that came from another sheriff's deputy who had been accused of engaging in sexual contact with an inmate. This is what it all comes from. So, after Tammy Ross was detained, handcuffed, and escorted away from the facility, apparently she talked to higher up, she talked to the federal government, and it resulted in a misdemeanor charge, a misdemeanor indictment against the sheriff, the new sheriff, that is. And after he was charged, he went basically on a spree of basically trying to retaliate against some of his workers who had given information about him. So that conduct resulted in the federal government going back and seeking a federal indictment of felony charges, now multiple charges, felonies, and seeking to have him detained, which, is why he finds himself where he is now, because now he's facing federal felony charges. Tammy filed a lawsuit against him alleging that he falsely imprisoned her, detained her, and, violated her Fourth Amendment rights when, he detained her that day at the jail. So, all of this stems from that situation. She filed a lawsuit, she complained, apparently went to the federal government and got, an investigation started into him. He already had a lot of issues anyway when he first was elected. A lot of people don't want to see a 28-year-old sheriff to begin with. The way he came in, there was a lot of, side eyes, a lot of animosity towards him. So this situation was a long time coming. Was definitely a long time coming. And, as a black man elected to being a sheriff in the St. Louis metropolitan area, that is definitely probably one of the worst things you can do, because they don't want you in power anyway. We've seen it across the country. We've seen it with mayors across the country being set up by the feds. We've seen it with prosecuting attorneys, black prosecuting attorneys across the country, in Baltimore, in Atlanta, in other places, being indicted. If you're black and you're in a position of authority, especially in St. Louis, you got to keep your nose clean. So Alfred Montgomery now sits in federal detention, awaiting trial as a sitting St. Louis sheriff, head sheriff, sitting in jail. How crazy is that? A lot of people don't recognize this also, and a lot of judges, even though they're supposed to be neutral and detached and impartial and look at the evidence from an impartial standpoint, they don't. A lot of these judges are former prosecutors. John Bodenhausen is the magistrate judge who issued the order to detain Sheriff Montgomery today. His name is John Bodenhausen. Now, John Bodenhausen, as I know better than anybody, is a former prosecutor in the Eastern District of Missouri. So the very same courts where John Bodenhausen was, a prosecutor, he's now a magistrate judge. So I've noticed that, when a lot of these judges come from, especially directly from a prosecutorial background, then they seem to usually, side on the, be on the prosecution side. They're usually anti-defendant. Getting your rights honored or getting yourself in a position where somebody will objectively look at the case or try to understand the situation isn't going to happen when you have a prosecutor that comes from that particular background. Many of them are. The system's already biased against blacks, it's biased against men, it's biased against you on a lot of different levels. But going in front of a judge, a magistrate or district judge in federal court, when that person came directly from a background of being a prosecutor, is mostly a lose-lose situation. So I hate to see Alfred Montgomery put the judge in that position, because John Bodenhausen, he's not the worst judge out there. He's not the worst judge out there at all. But when you tie the judge's hands or you give him an inch to go against you, they usually do. Especially when it comes from a prosecutorial background. So we'll see how this turns out. Alfred Montgomery, he sits in the jail right now. You got to fight this case from jail. And hopefully it goes good for him. But seeing that the attorney general is trying to get him out of office, seeing that basically the old sheriff who he replaced was against him, he has too many entities against him. Way too many entities against him. It reminds me of the case that just happened to Kim Gardner, the black woman prosecuting attorney from St. Louis. They were throwing all type of things at her and all type of accusations, and they got her up out of there. They eventually got her to resign, because the pressure got too much. So hopefully, he'll just go ahead and resign, see that the writing's on the wall, and it's time for him to just let it go. Time to let it go, because I don't think it's worth your freedom. When you see everybody wants you out, you're in a racist city, you're in a racist state you're in a climate where, you know, they're anti-black to begin with, it's better to just take your losses and move on with your life rather than compounding them and have to face all these felony charges. If I was him right now, I'd go right to my lawyer, go right to the prosecutor, say, hey, let me plead guilty to these misdemeanor charges so I can at least won't be a convicted felon, and let me come out of jail and let me surrender my position as sheriff. I'll do that. Maybe he can stop the bleeding that way, but we'll see how things turn out. Tell me what you guys think. Do you think this thing is racially motivated, or do you think he was just a piece of crap as a sheriff's deputy? I'm sorry, as a sheriff. And it just, you know, he just sucked, and that's the reason why this all happened to him. Tell me what you guys think. This is Mr. 100K a day. Till next time, y'all. Peace.